The night was bright with golden lights and the palace was alive with music and voices. Guests in glittering dresses and sharp suits moved across the marble floor as if they were dancing already. The chandeliers above threw diamonds of light onto the polished hall, and every corner smelled of roses and fine wine. The royal gala was more than a party. It was the place where the world's richest and most powerful came to show their faces. Journalists stood at the edges waiting for something newsworthy, and cameras flashed as each new arrival came through the grand entrance. Outside, the red carpet stretched like a ribbon of fire. Each car that stopped brought more whispers. A politician from one country, a prince from another, a famous actress. With diamonds shining around her neck, they all stepped out as if they were walking into history. The crowd cheered for some, ignored others, and always looked for the next surprise. The gala was not only about food and music, it was a silent competition, a place where reputations could rise or fall with one careless word or gesture. Then came a simple black car. Unlike the limousines before it, this one was quiet and plain. The door opened, and Keanu Reeves stepped out. He was dressed neatly but without sparkle. A black suit, nothing too loud, no jewels, no grand display. His hair was combed back simply, his walk calm and without arrogance. For a moment, the photographers paused. As if unsure, then the flashes exploded. Everyone knew his face, and yet some whispered, "Why is he here at this royal event?" Keanu did not wave wildly. He only gave a small nod, a soft smile, and moved forward. He walked as if he was just another guest, not the world-famous actor who had starred in countless films. His presence was gentle, almost too quiet for a place where everyone was trying to be noticed. That was what made some admire him and others doubt him. In a world built on showing off, he was walking in with nothing but simplicity. Inside the palace, the air felt heavy with perfume and importance. The guests were already gathered, talking, in clusters. Laughter spilled from one corner, sharp whispers from another. People carried champagne glasses as if they were crowns, and their eyes followed whoever was most powerful at the moment. Keanu walked in quietly, greeting those who noticed him. Some smiled, some nodded politely, but a few raised their eyebrows. They looked at him as though he had walked into the wrong place. One woman in particular, dressed in a gown of silver and diamonds, watched him carefully. She belonged to one of the oldest noble families, and she carried herself with pride as if the world should bow before her. She looked at Keanu's simple suit and the lack of glitter around him. A smirk touched her lips. She whispered to her friend, and they both laughed softly, thinking no one noticed. But others nearby caught it. Their eyes turned to Keanu, curious to see what would happen next. Keanu, unaware or perhaps simply not bothered, moved through the room with his usual grace. He stopped when someone greeted him, answered kindly, and never once pushed himself forward. To him, this was not a competition of wealth. It was just an evening. But to many of the people watching, it was strange. He didn't seem nervous, yet he didn't seem to care for the games of power around him. As the orchestra played, the evening shimmered on. The crowd buzzed with talks of politics, art, and wealth. Yet beneath the music, a tension grew. Some admired Keanu for being different, for not needing to shine to be respected. Others began to wonder why someone so quiet had been invited to a place of kings, queens, and princes. It was as if his presence itself was a challenge to their world of glitter and pride. The palace seemed even brighter with all the jewels reflecting, the lights. But in that brightness, Keanu stood out for being calm, for being human. His eyes moved across the hall, noticing the paintings, the architecture, the beauty of the place. He treated the moment with respect, but without the hunger that others had for being seen. Some journalists in the corner whispered that this might become a story. They had a sense that tonight was not going to pass without something dramatic. The noblewoman in silver watched him closely. Her pride grew with each step he took. She wanted to test him, to see if he truly belonged among them. She whispered again, this time louder. Her words were sharp, and people nearby began to listen. Her eyes locked on Keanu, but he kept his gentle smile, still unaware of the storm building around. Him. And so the gala carried on, bright and golden, but beneath the laughter and music, something else was waiting to happen. The air seemed to hold its breath, for soon the night would turn and everyone would remember not the jewels, not the wine, but the quiet man in the simple suit who walked into a palace of pride. The ballroom glowed with golden light. The sound of soft violins filled the air and the guests moved like pieces on a chessboard. Everyone was watching everyone. Every step, every word carried weight. Some were here to make allies, others to show off, and many to whisper behind jeweled fans or glass rims. Keanu stood among them, calm and simple, not chasing attention, yet eyes followed him everywhere. Some of the guests admired his quiet nature. They whispered to each other about how unusual it was to see a man so famous walk without pride. One gentleman leaned to his wife and said, "He carries himself like no one important, yet everyone knows his face." She nodded, curious. For them, Keanu's humility was refreshing. It made him shine in a way no diamonds could, but not everyone thought that way. In the far corner of the room stood the woman in silver, her gown sparkling with diamonds that caught every bit of light. She was from an old noble family, and her pride was sharper than her smile. Her eyes never left Keanu. She whispered to her friend beside her, "He doesn't belong here, look at him, no sparkle, no crown, just a man in a suit that could be bought anywhere." Her friend chuckled softly, and the two women hid their laughter behind their glasses of wine. Nearby guests caught the words. Some frowned at the unkindness, while others nodded in quiet agreement. To them this was a royal gala, a place for the best of the best. To see a man like Keanu walk in without jewels, without heirs, was almost an insult to their world. Whispers began to spread across the room. A ripple of judgment moved like a cold breeze. Keanu, however, seemed untouched by it. He smiled at those who greeted him, answered kindly, and kept his manner gentle. He didn't push into the center of the room. He didn't try to outshine anyone. He simply blended with quiet dignity. Yet that very dignity made him stand out more. Some guests grew even more restless. For how could a man so quiet steal the attention from their glitter and crowns, the whispering? Crowd grew louder. A group of younger nobles watched Keanu with narrowed eyes. "He looks too plain," one said. "How did he even get invited?" Another asked. They chuckled, but their voices carried. Soon half the room was murmuring, not loudly enough to be heard by Keanu, but enough to build a mood. The gala, once filled with laughter and music, now carried a strange tension. Not everyone joined in the mockery. An elderly duke leaned on his cane and shook his head. He whispered to his granddaughter, "That man holds more respect in his silence than many of these people with crowns. Remember, child, jewels fade, but character lasts." The young girl nodded and looked at Keanu with new eyes. Her heart felt a quiet admiration for the man who stood with calmness while the room buzzed with arrogance. The woman in silver was not finished. She grew bolder with each sip of her wine. Her voice carried. Farther now, she spoke louder to her circle of friends. "He may be an actor, but what is he here? Nothing more than a stranger among true nobility." Her words made some laugh. Others glanced nervously toward Keanu. They knew it was dangerous to speak so harshly in such a public place, yet the woman seemed to enjoy the attention. All the while, Keanu stayed near the edges of the ballroom, admiring the art on the walls, the paintings of kings and queens long gone. He took a moment to compliment a servant carrying a tray of drinks. His kindness made the servant smile, a small spark of warmth in a room that was growing colder with whispers. That tiny gesture did not go unnoticed. A few guests saw it and exchanged quiet looks of respect. For while others insulted, Keanu gave kindness even to those often ignored. The music rose higher as the orchestra changed tunes, but the mood was no longer light. A storm was forming. The whispers had created sides. Some were impressed by Keanu's grace. Others mocked his simplicity, and the woman in silver fueled the fire with every sharp word. It was as if the entire hall was waiting for something to happen, waiting for the tension to break. Eyes followed Keanu as he moved across the floor. Some hoped he would say something back. Others wished he would stumble. The whispering crowd had turned the gala into a stage, and they were waiting for the next act. They wanted to see if the man in the plain suit would rise or fall under their gaze. And though Keanu himself remained calm, the air carried a sense of unease. Something was coming, something bigger than whispers. For in that golden ballroom filled with pride, one sharp voice was ready to cross the line, and once it did, the night would never be forgotten. The woman in silver had been whispering for minutes, her laughter sharp like broken glass, but now she grew bolder, confident in the attention she had gathered. She raised her glass slightly, letting the light catch the diamonds on her wrist, and turned toward Keanu, who was standing quietly near a painting of an old king. The room seemed to freeze the moment Prince William entered, his presence commanding attention without a word. Guests shifted in their seats, some whispering nervously to each other, their polite laughter fading into uneasy silence. The woman in silver, once the center of the room's attention, now felt the weight of every gaze turn against her. She tried to keep her smile, but it faltered, a flicker of panic crossing her perfectly made-up face. Prince William moved gracefully, his steps measured and calm, scanning the room with quiet authority. His eyes landed on the woman in silver, and for a brief moment she felt as if they pierced through her, reading every thought and every arrogance she had tried to hide behind her jewels. The whispers around her grew louder, not in approval but in judgment, and some guests began exchanging knowing looks. They could see the shift, the balance of power moving away from the woman's hands. Keanu remained calm, standing slightly apart from the crowd, his gentle smile never leaving his face. He noticed the subtle tension building, the uncertainty in the woman's voice, and he remained silent, letting the moment unfold naturally. His quiet dignity contrasted sharply with her sharp words, making her feel smaller with every passing second. The prince, recognizing the awkwardness, approached slowly, his presence soft but firm, like a tide rolling in, leaving no space for arrogance to stand. The woman in silver tried to laugh, a high, forced sound meant to distract and reclaim attention, but it fell flat, echoing weakly against the walls of the grand hall. She glanced at her friends, hoping they would step in to support her, but they looked down nervously, unsure how to act in the presence of royalty. The prince's eyes remained calm but firm, and the silent judgment in the room weighed heavily on her, making her confidence crumble. As he reached closer, the prince's attention briefly shifted to Keanu, the nod of acknowledgement subtle but meaningful. It was a recognition of Keanu's patience, his calm demeanor in the face of insult, and a silent message to the woman that decorum, kindness, and humility were far stronger than arrogance or cruelty. The woman felt the eyes of the crowd burning into her, their judgment now amplified by the presence of royalty. The laughter she had relied on as her shield evaporated, leaving only tension and unease. Prince William spoke softly, his voice carrying through the room, gentle but commanding. Perhaps some words are better left unsaid. The woman in silver froze, her mouth opening slightly, unsure if she should respond. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if she would apologize, argue, or continue her display of pride. But she remained silent, realizing that words now could only worsen her position. Keanu's calm presence reinforced the moment. He stepped slightly forward, his eyes meeting hers, not with anger, but with a quiet understanding, a hint of pity. She realized that her attempt to embarrass him had failed completely, and that her cruelty now reflected only on herself. The guests began murmuring softly, some nodding at Keanu, admiring his patience. Others glanced at the prince, understanding that his arrival had subtly taught a lesson in humility and kindness. The woman in silver felt her heart racing, the color draining from her face. Her hands gripped her glass tightly, but even that didn't hide her nervousness. She tried to find a way to regain control, to turn the situation back to her favor, but every attempt seemed weaker than the last. Her friends whispered quietly to each other, unsure how to help, and some even began quietly excusing themselves from the table, the atmosphere shifting completely. Prince William continued to move slowly around the room, his eyes calm and observant. He acknowledged polite nods and greetings, but never lost. Focus on the subtle tension caused by the woman's words. Keanu stood quietly, letting the prince's presence do what no argument or defense could. The power of quiet dignity and kindness overshadowed arrogance and cruelty effortlessly. The woman in silver realized, with a sinking feeling, that her moment of glory had ended, replaced by a deep embarrassment she could not ignore. Every whisper, every glance, every soft murmur reminded her that she had misjudged the room, that her behavior had been cruel, and that kindness, humility, and grace commanded far more respect than arrogance ever could. The guests, now fully attentive, began to admire the scene unfolding before them. Not the jewels, not the gowns, but the way a man had remained calm in the face of insult, and the way a prince had entered quietly, changing the energy of the room. It was a lesson in dignity and respect, played out in the quiet movements and glances between people. The woman, in silver, finally aware of her mistake, lowered her gaze. The sparkle in her eyes dimmed, and the laughter that had once filled her presence was gone completely. In that moment, the room felt different, as if the night itself had shifted. The lesson was subtle yet clear. Kindness and calm carried a power no insult could overcome. The prince's intervention had not been loud or dramatic, but it was enough to teach the woman, and everyone present, that arrogance and cruelty had no place, and that dignity, grace, and patience would always command respect in any room. And as the soft music resumed, the guests began to feel a quiet sense of admiration for Keanu, for Prince William, and for the way the moment had unfolded naturally. The woman in silver sat in silence, realizing too late that her behavior had been wrong, and that the night would remember not her insults, but the quiet power of patience and kindness that had overcome them. The woman in silver sat frozen, her mind racing with embarrassment and disbelief. She had expected the night to be hers, a stage where her words and charm would command attention, but instead, the tables had turned completely. She looked around, noticing the subtle but unmistakable expressions of the guests: admiration for Keanu, curiosity, and respect for Prince William, and a quiet judgment toward herself. It was as if every whispered comment, every sideways glance carried a weight she could not escape. She tried to steady her breathing, hoping that maybe no one would remember her words, but deep down, she knew the damage was done. Her once confident smile now felt forced, hollow, and brittle. She tried to focus on the glittering chandeliers above, the elegant decorations, anything to distract from the heavy feeling pressing on her chest, but it was impossible to ignore. The lesson was sinking in slowly, painfully, that arrogance and cruelty had consequences. Even in the most glamorous settings, Keanu Reeves remained, calm and composed, standing with an air of quiet dignity. His presence was steady, not boastful, not angry, simply graceful and humane. He did not need to speak, for his silence was a statement on its own. His gentle smile toward the prince conveyed gratitude, and his eyes briefly met the woman's, not with anger but with a quiet understanding that her arrogance had revealed more about her than him. The room seemed to hang on this unspoken exchange, every guest absorbing the subtle tension and the power of calm dignity. Prince William moved gently through the room, his eyes scanning the crowd with thoughtful care. He noticed the whispers, the shifting postures, and the subtle attempts of some guests to make sense of the situation. His presence was commanding, yet gentle, reminding everyone that true influence came from respect, patience, and kindness rather than status or insult. The woman in silver felt her heart sink further, realizing that her attempt to dominate the room had failed entirely. Her mind replayed the insult she had thrown at Keanu, the sharp words she had believed would stun him, but instead had revealed only her own cruelty. Every detail of the moment haunted her: his calm eyes, the polite nod from Prince William, the quiet acknowledgement from other guests. She had expected shock, embarrassment, maybe even laughter from him, but none of that came, and that was worse than any immediate reaction could have been. She understood now that her behavior reflected on her character more than on anyone else's. The murmurs in the room grew louder, not in mockery, but in a collective recognition of what had occurred. People were quietly discussing Keanu's calmness, His patience, the way he had handled insult without anger, and Prince William's subtle but effective intervention. They admired the way the situation had been handled, appreciating the restraint, the grace, and the gentle lesson that had been given without drama or harsh words. The woman in silver realized she could not escape the lesson now. It had been delivered flawlessly, and she was forced to confront it. She shifted in her seat, feeling smaller with every passing second. Her jewelry, her dress, her carefully styled hair suddenly felt meaningless in the face of real dignity. She remembered the smile she had aimed at Keanu, intending to display superiority. But now it felt fake and hollow. Her friends, who had once laughed along with her, now avoided eye contact, sensing her discomfort and perhaps feeling the weight of her misjudgment. The glitter of the gala could not mask the truth, and she felt it pressing down like a cold weight on her shoulders. Keanu quietly continued to observe, never raising his voice, never showing anger, simply embodying patience and understanding. His presence reminded everyone that strength did not always come from confrontation, and that kindness and dignity often held more power than sharp words or quick insults. The woman felt the contrast painfully, her own arrogance glaring back at her in comparison. Every guest seemed to sense the unspoken lesson, and the weight of it fell heavily on her. Her pride was shattered, and she realized that the lesson in humility had been delivered perfectly. Prince William, recognizing her discomfort, did not humiliate her further. Instead, he offered a kind and measured glance, an unspoken signal that she could still recover if she chose to act with respect and humility. The room felt quieter now, everyone watching to see how she would respond. It was a pivotal moment, where a single choice could define how the rest of the evening would unfold. Would she apologize, retreat, or continue to cling to false pride? The air was thick with anticipation, and the woman could feel every eye on her. She tried to speak, but her voice faltered, a nervous stammer that revealed her inner turmoil. She realized that words alone could not undo the impression she had left, but a sincere change in attitude could begin to repair it. Her confidence, which had once been fueled by arrogance, now felt fragile and uncertain. She looked at Keanu, at Prince William, and for the first time that evening, she saw the power of humility, the strength and patience, and the quiet authority and kindness. The rest of the guests began to relax slightly, sensing that the tension had shifted. The woman's friends exchanged glances, and some began whispering quietly, encouraging her to recover gracefully. The music resumed softly in the background, and the glittering gala, once a scene for arrogance and insult, became a lesson in dignity and humility for everyone present. The woman in silver understood that this night would be remembered not for her words, but for the quiet, powerful lesson that had unfolded before her. And as the evening continued, she felt a sense of reflection, a need to reconsider how she treated others. Her arrogance and hasty words had not brought her the attention she sought, but Keanu's calm demeanor and Prince William's quiet authority had taught her a lesson in patience, respect, and humility that no amount of jewelry or glamour could ever replace. The room continued to sparkle, but now with a deeper understanding of human character, and the woman in silver could not ignore the truth of it. The woman in silver sat in her seat, the weight of embarrassment pressing heavily on her chest. She had spent the last few minutes replaying the moment over and over in her mind. Every word she had spoken to Keanu Reeves, every laugh she had expected from the guests, and the shock when none came. She had intended to charm the room, to show her wit and confidence, but instead her words had revealed only arrogance and cruelty. Her carefully built image had crumbled in an instant, and the realization stung sharply. She looked at Keanu, who remained calm and composed, his face showing no anger, no malice, only quiet dignity. He had not raised his voice, had not thrown her words back in her face, but his presence alone conveyed a subtle but powerful lesson. She felt a mix of shame and admiration, realizing that true strength was not in mockery or insult, but in restraint and kindness. The other guests whispered softly among themselves, noting the contrast between her attitude and his, and the woman could feel the judgment in their eyes, heavy and unyielding. Prince William moved closer, his eyes scanning the room as if reading the minds of the guests. He noticed the subtle tension, the hushed murmurs, and the way the woman in silver shifted nervously in her seat. His presence was calm but commanding, a reminder that true influence came from respect and composure, not from wealth, beauty, or status. The woman felt the weight of his gaze, and it pressed down on her like a silent admonition. She realized that recovering from her mistake would not be easy, and that this evening had become a lesson she could not escape. Her friends, who had once laughed and encouraged her, now avoided eye contact, sensing the deep discomfort she felt. She had relied on their support, but their silence now made her feel more isolated. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her trembling hands, trying to gather her thoughts and find some way to mend the situation. Her mind raced with possibilities, none of which felt sufficient. She wanted to apologize, but the words seemed fragile and weak compared to the arrogance she had displayed. Finally, she took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage she had. She stood slowly, her eyes meeting Keanu's, her heart pounding in her chest. The room quieted almost instinctively. Sensing that something significant was about to happen, she could feel the eyes of every guest on her, and the weight of expectation pressed heavily on her shoulders. She had a choice now: to continue hiding behind pride or to confront her mistake with honesty and humility. I am sorry," she began, her voice shaky but sincere. "I did not mean to insult you, Mr. Reeves." She paused, gathering strength to continue. "My words were cruel, and they do not reflect who I want to be." The room remained silent, every ear tuned to her apology. Her friends glanced at her with tentative approval, relieved that she had chosen honesty over arrogance. Keanu's expression softened slightly, a small, understanding smile forming on his lips, signaling that he had heard her and that her words, though late, were acknowledged. Prince William watched quietly, his face calm, yet his eyes reflected a subtle approval. He recognized the difficulty of the moment, the courage it took to admit a mistake publicly. The guests began to murmur softly among themselves, noting her apology, and a few nodded slightly, acknowledging her effort to make amends. The atmosphere shifted, tension giving way to reflection. She could feel the heavy weight on her shoulders begin to lift slightly, replaced by a cautious hope that she could redeem herself in the eyes of the room. She continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "I allowed my arrogance to guide me, and I see now that it was wrong. You have shown me patience, dignity, and kindness, qualities I hope to learn from." Keanu nodded gently, his calm presence reassuring her. The guests leaned in slightly, as if wanting to witness the transformation unfold. The woman realized that her apology was not just for him, but for herself, a way to acknowledge her mistakes and begin to change. Her friends now looked at her with a mix of relief and respect. Seeing that she had finally chosen the right path, the room itself seemed to breathe more easily, the tension that had hung over the gala dissipating slowly. She felt a sense of humility settle in her heart, a recognition that respect and kindness held far more power than arrogance or insult. And though she knew it would take time to rebuild her image, she also knew that she had taken the first, most important step toward redemption. Keanu remained composed, but his quiet approval spoke volumes. His presence reminded everyone that strength came not from dominance or pride, but from empathy, patience, and understanding. Prince William's subtle nod of acknowledgement reinforced the lesson, a silent but powerful message about the value of humility and grace. The woman in silver felt a deep sense of gratitude, knowing that she had been given a chance to learn something invaluable that night, a lesson she would carry with her for the rest of her life. As the music continued softly in the background, and the glittering lights of the gala reflected off crystal chandeliers, she stood tall, no longer with arrogance, but with the beginnings of genuine respect and humility. Her apology had been heard, and though the journey of regaining trust and admiration would continue, she now understood that true strength came from admitting one's mistakes and striving to be better. And in that moment, surrounded by the elegance of the gala, she felt a quiet but profound change within herself, a shift toward kindness, understanding, and genuine humanity. The gala continued, but the air inside the ballroom had changed completely. The music still played, the lights still sparkled across the crystal chandeliers, and the guests still sipped their drinks. Yet everyone carried the memory of what had just happened. The woman in silver, once bold and sharp with her words, now stood humbled. Her apology still echoed in the minds of those who had heard it. And though some whispered about her arrogance, many more spoke quietly of the way Keanu had responded with calm dignity. The woman felt lighter now, though she knew her mistake could not be erased so easily. Her pride had cracked, leaving space for something new to grow. She kept her eyes lowered, not out of shame but from reflection, realizing how much energy she had wasted on appearances and how much respect she had lost by mocking kindness around her. The guests whispered of lessons, of how quickly arrogance could shatter under the weight of true dignity. Keanu walked through the ballroom with the same calm grace he had shown all evening. He smiled gently when spoken to, thanked people with quiet words, and treated everyone the same. Nobles, servants, strangers alike. This made him stand out, even more, not because of fame but because of character. His silence during the insult, his lack of anger, and his simple acceptance of the apology had left a lasting impression. The guests found themselves drawn to him, not because of what he had done on the screen, but because of who he had shown himself to be in that moment. Prince William observed all this quietly. His role had been small, yet powerful, a steady reminder that authority was not about raising one's voice, but about guiding with presence. His support of Keanu without a single harsh word had made the woman in silver realize the depth of her mistake, and it had made the crowd reflect on what true nobility meant. The prince's subtle actions became part of the story whispered from table to table, his presence turning the night into a living lesson. The woman in silver sat quietly now, her hands folded in her lap. She no longer felt the need to display her jewels or raise her voice. Instead, she listened to the people around her, hearing things she had never cared to hear before. The warmth in their tones when they spoke of kindness, the admiration in their eyes when they looked at Keanu. She realized that her arrogance had blinded her to something greater, and though she felt the sting of shame, she also felt the beginning of change. Her friends, once eager to laugh at her sharp remarks, now spoke to her softly, encouraging her not with flattery but with truth. "You did well to apologize," one said gently. "It was the right thing to do." Another added, "People will remember your mistake, but they will also remember your courage to admit it." The words comforted her slightly, reminding her that humility could rebuild what arrogance had destroyed. The other guests, too, were changed by what they had seen. A few who had once sneered at Keanu's simplicity now admired it deeply. They compared it to their own lives, wondering if they too had placed too much value on wealth and status. One elderly duke leaned to his granddaughter and whispered, "Do you see, child? That is what true nobility looks like, not in crowns but in character." The girl nodded, her young eyes wide with admiration, and she knew she would never forget the lesson. Keanu himself never sought to teach anyone, but his behavior taught, more than any speech could. His calmness in the face of insult, his patience when mocked, and his gentle acceptance of an apology turned the night into a quiet story of kindness. He showed that dignity was not loud, not boastful, but steady and unshaken, and it left the guests reflecting on their own actions, wondering how they would have responded if they had been in his place. The woman in silver felt her chest ache, with regret, but also with relief. For the first time that night, she looked at Keanu not as a man to belittle, but as someone to learn from. She realized that true beauty was not in diamonds or gowns, but in the strength of character. She whispered quietly to herself, promising never to let pride guide her words again. The lesson she had learned burned deeply into her heart, and she knew it would follow her long after the gala ended. Prince William eventually raised his glass for a quiet toast, not mentioning names, not drawing attention to anyone. He simply said, "To dignity, to kindness, and to remembering what truly matters." The crowd raised their glasses in unison, the words simple yet powerful. The woman in silver felt the weight of those words sink into her soul. Keanu lifted his glass as well, smiling softly, and the room sparkled not from the jewels, but from the shared moment of understanding. The night moved forward, but it was no longer the same kind of celebration. It had turned into something richer, something deeper. Every guest left with more than just memories of music and fine wine. They left with a lesson they could not forget. The woman in silver knew her reputation had been bruised, but she also knew her heart had been changed. And as the gala went on, she carried that lesson with her, a quiet reminder that arrogance fades quickly, but humility and kindness remain forever. The night slowly drew toward its end, yet the memory of what had happened in the ballroom stayed alive in every guest's mind. The gala had begun as a stage of wealth and pride, filled with sparkling gowns, polished shoes, and glittering jewels. But it was ending with something far more valuable. It was ending with a lesson that no one had expected. The woman in silver, once loud and full of arrogance, now sat in quiet reflection. Her pride melted away. She looked smaller somehow, not because of her dress or jewels, but because of the heavy truth she had been forced to face. Keanu Reeves remained calm as always, his quiet smile never leaving his face. He walked among the guests, shaking hands politely, thanking those who greeted him, never once mentioning the insult or the drama. His silence was more powerful than words. It showed that forgiveness could be stronger than anger, and that dignity did not need to shout. People respected him more now than they had before, not because of his fame, but because of his humanity. Prince William moved gracefully through the room, his presence steady and composed. He spoke softly to the guests, his words warm and thoughtful. He did not mention the insult either, but his simple acknowledgement of Keanu earlier had already spoken volumes. The prince had shown that true nobility was not about rank or wealth, but about recognizing kindness and honoring humility. The guests carried this truth in their hearts, whispering to each other that this gala would be remembered not for its glitter, but for its lesson. The woman in silver finally gathered the courage to walk toward Keanu. Her steps were slow, her heart heavy, but she knew she could not leave without showing him respect. When she reached him, she lowered her eyes and spoke softly. "Thank you for your patience and your kindness." Her voice trembled, but it carried sincerity. Keanu simply smiled and nodded, his words simple. "Be kind, it's the best gift we can give." That small sentence struck her deeper than any sharp reply could have, and she felt tears sting her eyes. Around them, the guests noticed the exchange. Some whispered that they had never seen someone so humble handle such cruelty with so much grace. Others said they had learned more in one evening than in years of living in high society. The gala had turned into a mirror, showing each person who they truly were. Some felt proud of their compassion, others felt ashamed of their arrogance, but all knew they would carry the memory home with them. The music played on, but it seemed softer now. No longer just background sound, but a gentle reminder of the harmony that had been restored. The laughter of the guests returned, but it was lighter, more genuine, free of the sharp edge of pride. The woman in silver sat quietly for the rest of the evening, humbled but strangely at peace. She knew her name would be remembered that night, but not for the reasons she had once wanted. Instead, she would be remembered as the woman who had learned a lesson in front of royalty and the world. Prince William eventually stepped forward once again, raising his glass to the crowd. His words were brief, but they carried a weight that settled deep in every heart. "Tonight reminds us all true worth is not measured in jewels or titles, but in how we treat one another." The crowd raised their glasses in unison, their voices blending as they echoed the toast. Keanu lifted his glass as well, his eyes calm, his smile kind. The moment felt timeless, as though it would be remembered in every retelling of the night. As the gala came to a close, carriages and cars waited outside. Guests stepped out into the cool night air, their minds heavy with thoughts. Some whispered about the beauty of the palace, others about the music, but most spoke quietly of Keanu and the lesson he had taught without even trying. They repeated the prince's words. They replayed the woman's insult and apology, and they admitted to themselves that they too had learned something. The woman in silver sat in her carriage, staring out into the night. The jewels around her neck no longer felt like treasures, but reminders of her arrogance. Yet for the first time, she felt no desire to shine brighter than anyone else. Instead, she felt a quiet determination to be better, to treat people with respect, and to let kindness guide her words. She knew the road ahead would not erase her mistake, but it could shape her into someone new, someone stronger in heart. Keanu returned to his quiet life after the gala, never boasting about what had happened, never repeating the story. For him, it had been just another night where he had chosen patience over pride, kindness over cruelty. Yet the world around him carried the memory forward. The guests who had seen it told the story again and again, each time reminding others that humility and grace could silence arrogance better than any sharp reply. Prince William, too, carried the lesson with him, not as something he had done, but as something he had witnessed. He had seen a man with no crown command more respect than a woman dripping in diamonds, and he knew the memory of that night would remain with him, reminding him that true leadership came from humility. And so the gala ended, not as a night of wealth and glory, but as a night of truth, a night when arrogance was silenced, when humility was honored, and when kindness became the brightest jewel in the room. The woman in silver, the humbled guest, the whispering crowd, and even the royals themselves left with a story they would never forget. A story that proved once more that kindness lasts longer than pride, and that respect is earned not through titles, but through the quiet strength of character.